Grace Bennett learned about betrayal on a Thursday morning in Cleveland, standing in the bathroom of the two-bedroom apartment she could barely afford, staring at two pink lines that would change everything. 28 years old. Night shift nurse at Metro General. Student loans that would take 20 years to pay off. A husband who wiped construction when the jobs came through, which they didn't. Not lately. Not in a city where half the buildings stood empty and the other half were being torn down for condos nobody local could afford. The pregnancy test sat on the edge of the sink. Her hands shook. Not from fear of the baby. She'd always wanted children. Someday, when things were more stable, when they had health insurance that didn't come with a $5,000 deductible, when Michael stopped drinking so much after work. Her hands shook because she'd found the bank statements that morning. The ones Michael had hidden in his truck. The ones showing withdrawals she didn't make, transfers she didn't authorize, accounts she didn't know existed. $43,000. Gone. Every penny they'd saved. Every overtime shift she'd worked through exhaustion. Every double he'd claimed to pick up. Every sacrifice they'd made to build something, anything, in a country that seemed determined to grind them into dust. Gone. And the baby growing inside her had no idea what kind of world it was coming into. Grace pressed her palm against the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her had dark circles under her eyes. Scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and other people's pain. Hair pulled back in a bun that hadn't been washed in 3 days because the water heater kept breaking and the landlord kept promising to fix it next week. Next week. Always next week. She'd married Michael Bennett 6 years ago in a small church outside Akron. Her mother had been alive then. Her father had walked her down the aisle. They'd honeymooned at Niagara Falls because it was close and cheap and beautiful in that way America used to be before everything got so expensive, so complicated, so hard. Michael had promised her things would get better. That Cleveland was coming back. That the jobs were coming back. That they'd make it work the way their parents had. The way generations of American families had always made it work, through grit and faith and the belief that tomorrow might be kinder than today. But tomorrow kept lying. And now this. Grace walked into the kitchen. Michael sat at the table, coffee going cold in front of him, scrolling through his phone with the kind of focus that meant he wasn't really seeing anything at all. "We need to talk," she said. He didn't look up. "About what?" "About where our money went." His thumb stopped moving. The kitchen went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of someone's bass thumping through the wall from the apartment next door. "I can explain," Michael said. $43,000, Grace said. Her voice didn't shake. "Not anymore. That's what you need to explain." He stood up, put his phone in his pocket, looked at her the way strangers look at each other on the subway, careful, distant, like they'd never shared a bed or a dream or 6 years of trying to survive America's slow collapse together. "It was an investment," he said. "In what?" "A business opportunity." Grace laughed. It came out bitter and sharp, the sound of something breaking that couldn't be fixed. "With who?" "People I know." "What people?" "It doesn't matter." "It's our money, Michael. It matters." He moved toward the door. She blocked his path. 5'6" to his 6'2", but she'd spent 6 years lifting patients twice her size and she knew how to stand her ground. "I'm pregnant," she said. Michael stopped. His face went through several expressions at once. Surprise, fear, anger, something that might have been regret if she looked at it sideways in bad lighting. "Grace." "Don't," she said. "Don't you dare. Just tell me what you did with our money." "I gambled it." The words hung in the air between them like smoke, like poison, like the truth that had been hiding in their marriage for longer than Grace wanted to admit. "You what?" "I thought I could win it back. I thought." "You gambled away our entire savings." "I was trying to help us." "By destroying us." Michael pushed past her, grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. "I need to go." "Where?" "Out." "Michael." The door slammed. The sound echoed through the apartment, through Grace's chest, through the life she'd been trying to build in a country that kept taking more than it gave. She stood alone in the kitchen, hand pressed to her stomach, baby the size of a poppy seed, according to the app she'd downloaded that morning. Too small to feel, too new to understand, too fragile to know that its father had just walked away and its mother was about to lose everything. Grace's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But nurses learn to answer every call because sometimes it's the hospital, sometimes it's an emergency, sometimes it's the difference between life and death. Hello? Mrs. Bennett. A man's voice. Smooth. Calm. The kind of voice that knew exactly how much power it carried and didn't need to shout about it. Who is this? My name is Cole Ashford. Your husband owes me a great deal of money. Grace's blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. $43,000. Plus interest. Plus fees for the trouble of having to make this call. That's your entire savings. Yes. Michael was confident he could triple it. He was wrong. Grace sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where she and Michael used to eat breakfast together, where they'd planned their future, where he'd promised her things would be different, better, possible. I don't have that kind of money, she said. I know. Then why are you calling? Because I'm not interested in bankrupting a nurse who works night shifts and still can't afford to fix her water heater. Grace's throat tightened. How do you know that? I know many things, Mrs. Bennett, including the fact that you're pregnant and that your husband just walked out your door. She looked at the window, drew the curtain aside. The street below was empty except for a black car parked across from her building. Expensive. Foreign. The kind that didn't belong in this neighborhood where people drove 15-year-old sedans and prayed they'd start in winter. Are you watching me? I'm protecting my investment. I'm not an investment. No, Cole Ashford said. You're collateral. Before we go on, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Grace's hands clenched around the phone. What do you want? I want what I'm owed. I can't give you that. Then I'll take something else. The line went dead. Grace sat in the silence of her kitchen, in the apartment she could no longer afford, carrying a child she couldn't support, married to a man who'd sold their future for a losing bet, and she understood with perfect clarity that her old life had just ended. What came next would be worse, or it would be salvation, but it wouldn't be ordinary ever again. Outside, the black car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into Cleveland's gray morning, and Grace Bennett felt the first contraction of fear wrap around her heart like a fist. The hospital became Grace's sanctuary. For 12 hours every night, she could lose herself in other people's emergencies. Trauma bays and cardiac arrests, overdoses and car wrecks, the kind of suffering that made her own problems feel smaller, even though they weren't, even though they were growing inside her one cell at a time. Michael didn't come home that night, or the next. His phone went to voicemail. His truck wasn't at his buddy's place or his brother's apartment or any of the bars where he used to drink away his unemployment checks. He'd vanished the way people do in America when the weight gets too heavy, quietly, completely, leaving nothing behind but debt and questions and the kind of damage that doesn't show up on x-rays. Grace told herself she didn't care, that she was better off without him, that she could do this alone the way women had always done it, raising babies on nurses' wages and food stamps and the kind of determination that America claimed to admire but never actually rewarded. She told herself a lot of things. None of them were true. On the third night, she came home from her shift to find Cole Ashford sitting in her kitchen. Not breaking in, not forcing entry, just sitting there at her table like he owned it, because in a way, maybe he did. Cup of coffee in front of him, steam rising in the dim light from the stove. He'd made himself at home in the space where her marriage had died. Grace froze in the doorway. Her hand went to the pepper spray on her keychain. Not that it would matter. Men like Cole Ashford didn't get stopped by pepper spray or deadbolts or the kind of fear that made normal people hesitate. Mrs. Bennett, he said, we need to talk. You can't be here. And yet I am. He gestured to the chair across from him. Grace didn't sit. She stood in her scrubs with her bag over her shoulder and her exhaustion showing through her skin, and she tried to remember what Michael had told her about this man before he'd disappeared. Nothing good. Cole Ashford looked exactly like money. Not new money. Not the kind that bought lottery tickets and sports cars. Old money. East Coast money. The kind that came with boarding schools and family estates and the absolute certainty that the world would bend to accommodate you because it always had. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Grace made in 3 months. Dark hair, gray eyes, the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers or corporate boardrooms or anywhere power gathered and made its quiet demands. Early 40s, maybe. Wedding ring absent. Expensive watch catching the light. How did you get in? Grace asked. Does it matter? It matters to me. Your landlord is 3 months behind on his mortgage. I bought the building this afternoon. Technically, I'm your new landlord. Technically, I have keys. Grace felt something cold slide down her spine. You bought my building. I bought 4 buildings on this block. Your neighborhood is undervalued. Good investment opportunity. You're lying. I rarely lie, Mrs. Bennet. Lying is for people without options. I have many options. Grace finally Saturday. Not because she wanted to. Because her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Because the weight of the past 3 days was catching up to her. Because this man had just bought her entire world and she didn't know whether to scream or cry or call the police. Not that the police would help. Not against someone like him. What do you want? She asked. Your husband owes me $78,000. You said 43. That was 3 days ago. Interest accrues quickly. That's insane. That's business. Grace pressed her palms against the table. The same table where she'd found out she was pregnant. Where Michael had confessed his betrayal. Where her life kept ending in smaller and smaller increments. I don't have that kind of money, she said. I know. Then why are you here? Cole Ashford took a sip of his coffee. Set the cup down with the precision of someone who'd never dropped anything by accident in his life. Because I have a proposal. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet. I don't need to. Whatever you're offering, the answer is no. Even if it saves you. Grace laughed, bitter and sharp. Nobody saves anyone. Not in this country. Not anymore. You're wrong. Am I? Yes. He reached into his jacket. Grace flinched, but he only pulled out a piece of paper. Folded once. Expensive letterhead. The kind of document that changed lives. He slid it across the table. Read it, he said. Grace didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to know what kind of deal the devil made when he showed up in Cleveland wearing a suit that cost more than her car. But curiosity was stronger than fear. It always was. That's how people ended up in situations they couldn't escape. She picked up the paper. Read it once. Read it again. Looked up at Cole Ashford with something between horror and disbelief. You can't be serious. I'm always serious. This is a contract. Simple terms. You come work for me. I clear your husband's debt. I pay for your prenatal care. I provide housing, security, everything you need. You and your baby will never want for anything. In exchange for what? Your time. My time doing what? Whatever I require. Grace stood up. The chair scraped against the linoleum. I'm not a prostitute. Cole's expression didn't change. I'm not asking you to be. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you to trust me. I don't know you. You don't know anyone, Mrs. Bennet. Your husband abandoned you. Your family is gone. Your friends stopped calling when the money ran out. You're alone in a city that's dying, in an apartment you can't afford, carrying a child you can't support. I'm offering you a way out. By becoming your prisoner. By becoming my employee. Same thing. Not at all. Grace wanted to throw the contract in his face. Wanted to tell him to leave and never come back. Wanted to believe she could do this alone, could survive on her own terms, could make it work the way Americans were supposed to make it work. But she'd been lying to herself for 3 days. And lies got expensive. And she was so tired of being poor in a country that punished poverty like it was a moral failure instead of a systemic one. Why me? She asked. Because you're strong. You don't know that. I know you've worked double shifts for 6 years. I know you put yourself through nursing school while your husband drank away the rent money. I know you've held people's hands while they died and still showed up the next day. I know you're about to become a single mother in Ohio with no support system, and you're not crying or begging or falling apart. That's strength, Mrs. Bennett. That's exactly what I need. Grace looked at the contract again. The numbers made her dizzy. $78,000. Erased. Prenatal care. Housing. Security. Everything she needed to give her baby a chance. All she had to do was sign her name and trust a man she'd never met. A man who'd bought her building like it was nothing. A man whose eyes held secrets that would swallow her whole. If you've ever felt torn between fear and hope, you'll understand her choice. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. What happens if I say no? Grace asked. Cole Ashford stood, buttoned his jacket, looked at her with something that might have been pity if men like him felt pity for people like her. Then I collect from your husband. And when I can't find him, I collect from you. Your wages, your assets, your apartment, everything. You'll give birth in a county hospital with no insurance and raise your child in a shelter if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, he paused. Well, Cleveland winters are cold. And babies are fragile. Grace felt the baby inside her. Still too small to kick. Still just a promise of what could be. She picked up the pen. Cole Ashford's world existed in the clouds above Chicago. A penthouse in a building where doormen wore white gloves and knew better than to ask questions. Glass walls overlooking Lake Michigan. Marble floors. Art that belonged in museums. The kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. Grace arrived on a Sunday with one suitcase and a belly that was just starting to show. No goodbye to Cleveland. No forwarding address. Just a black car that picked her up at dawn and drove 6 hours west while she watched Ohio turn into Indiana turn into Illinois, watching her old life disappear in the rearview mirror like it had never existed at all. The penthouse had 5 bedrooms. Grace got the one facing east, where morning light flooded through windows that didn't open. Beautiful. Expensive. Trapped. Cole had rules. Simple ones. Clear ones. The kind that felt reasonable until she realized they weren't. She could go anywhere in the penthouse. But she couldn't leave without security. She could call anyone she wanted. But all phones were monitored. She could have visitors. But Cole had to approve them first. For her safety, he said. Because Michael's creditors were dangerous. Because the people Cole dealt with were worse. Grace told herself to be grateful. She had a roof over her head, food in the refrigerator, a doctor who made house calls and didn't ask why she couldn't come to the clinic. Everything she needed. Everything except freedom. The first week, she hated him. Cole worked from home most days. Phone calls in languages she didn't understand. Video conferences that lasted hours. Men in dark suits who came and went without making eye contact. The kind of business that happened in shadows and offshore accounts and places the law couldn't reach. He never told her what he did. She never asked. Some questions were dangerous to know the answers to. But he checked on her. Every morning. Every evening. Asked about the baby. About her health. About whether she needed anything. The kindness felt like manipulation. The concern felt like control. Grace kept her distance, answered in short sentences, refused to engage beyond what the contract required. She was an employee, not a guest, definitely not something more. The second week, her resolve started cracking. It happened slowly, small moments that shouldn't have mattered but did. Cole bought her books. Not romance novels or magazines, but the kind of books she used to read before nursing school and double shift stole her time. history, poetry, philosophy. He noticed what she picked up, and the next day 3 more would appear on the coffee table. He cooked breakfast sometimes. Nothing fancy. Eggs and toast. Coffee the way she liked it, even though she'd never told him. He'd sit across from her at the dining table that could seat 12, and they'd eat in silence while Chicago woke up below them. He never touched her, never looked at her wrong, never made demands beyond the basic requirements of their arrangement. And somehow that made it worse. Because she could have hated him if he'd been cruel, could have kept her walls up if he'd been demanding. But Cole Ashford was patient in the way that powerful men are when they know time is on their side. The 3rd week, Grace started asking questions. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one morning. Rain against the windows, coffee going cold between them. "Doing what?" "All of this. The books, the food, caring about whether I sleep well." "Because you're carrying a child." "That's not your child. It will be mine to protect." Grace set down her cup. "What does that mean?" "It means I keep what's mine safe. I'm not yours." Cole looked at her, really looked at her, gray eyes that saw too much. "Aren't you?" She didn't have an answer, because the contract said she was, because he'd paid her debt, because she was living in his home, eating his food, accepting his protection, because somewhere between Cleveland and Chicago, between survival and surrender, the lines had gotten blurred. The 4th week, Grace started to understand. Cole Ashford wasn't just rich. He was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that America pretended didn't exist outside of movies. Old family money mixed with new family business. Legitimate enterprises hiding illegitimate ones. Lawyers and accountants and men with guns who all answered to the same quiet voice. She overheard things. Phone calls that ended when she entered rooms. Conversations in Italian, Russian, languages she couldn't identify. Names that made the men in suits tense up. She saw things. Briefcases that got handled like they contained something more valuable than money. Security footage from businesses she recognized from the news. Documents that got shredded immediately after being read. Cole ran an empire. Legal on the surface. Something else underneath. And Grace was living in the heart of it. If this story has already found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more stories that stay long after they end. She should have been terrified, should have demanded to leave, should have called someone, anyone, though she didn't know who would believe her or what she'd even say. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years, because Cole Ashford protected what was his, and whether she liked it or not, she was his now. Bound by contract and circumstance and the reality that she had nowhere else to go. The baby grew. Her belly swelled. Spring turned to summer. Chicago heat pressed against the windows, but the penthouse stayed cool, climate-controlled, perfect in its isolation. Grace's doctor said everything looked good. Healthy baby. Strong heartbeat. No complications. She was gaining weight the right way. Sleeping better. Stress levels down. Being a prisoner in a gilded cage was apparently good for prenatal health. Cole bought her maternity clothes without being asked. Hired a chef when he noticed she was getting tired of takeout. Set up a nursery in the room next to hers with furniture that cost more than her old car. He still hadn't touched her. Still kept his distance. Still treated her with the kind of careful respect that felt like he was handling something fragile. But his eyes lingered sometimes. When she walked past, when she laughed at something on television, when she stood by the windows with her hand on her belly, watching the city she couldn't reach. And Grace found herself watching him back, noticing things, the way he rolled his sleeves when he worked from home, the gray in his hair at his temples, the scar on his left hand that he never explained, the way he took his coffee black but always made haze with cream and sugar even though she'd never asked. The way he existed in his space with absolute certainty, like a man who'd never questioned his right to be there, to have everything, to own even the air they breathed. It should have repulsed her, should have made her hate him more. Instead, it made her curious, made her wonder what had built a man like this. What had happened to make him rich and dangerous and lonely enough to bring a pregnant stranger into his home instead of just taking his money and disappearing? Made her wonder what it would feel like to be chosen instead of collected, to be wanted instead of owned, to be something more than collateral in a game she didn't understand. The 5th week, everything changed. Grace woke up at 3 in the morning to sounds that didn't belong. Shouting, glass breaking, gunfire echoing through the penthouse like thunder trapped indoors. She scrambled out of bed, pressed against the wall, hand on her belly protecting the baby that couldn't understand what danger meant but could feel her heart racing. Her door opened. Cole stood in the hallway, gun in his hand, blood on his shirt, eyes cold in a way she'd never seen. "Stay here," he said. "What's happening?" "People who shouldn't be here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Cole!" "Lock the door, Grace." He disappeared. The gunfire continued. Grace locked the door with shaking hands and stood in the dark listening to her world fall apart and wondering if this was how it ended. In a penthouse in Chicago, carrying a baby that would never know its father, about to die because of a debt she didn't incur and a choice she didn't make. The shooting stopped. Silence fell heavy and complete. Grace waited. 5 minutes. 10. 20. Someone knocked. "Grace." Cole's voice. "It's over. Open the door." She did. Slowly, carefully, ready to run even though there was nowhere to go. Cole stood in the hallway. More blood now. Not his, she thought. His eyes had softened back to something almost human. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "The baby." "Fine. I think. I don't know." He holstered his gun, stepped closer, raised his hand like he might touch her face but stopped himself. Dropped it. The distance between them felt smaller than it ever had. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For bringing you into this." "You saved me." "Did I?" Grace looked at him. Really looked at him. Man made of contradictions. Power and vulnerability. Violence and tenderness. The person who'd bought her debt and given her shelter and just killed people to keep her safe. "Yes," she said. "You did." Something passed between them. Unspoken. Dangerous. The kind of recognition that happens when two people realize they are more alike than they want to admit. Then Cole turned and walked away, and Grace stood alone in her beautiful prison, and she understood that she wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was something much more complicated. Something that didn't have a name yet. Something that terrified her more than any gun. Summer deepened over Chicago. Heat waves that made the lake shimmer. Tourists crowding Michigan Avenue. The city alive with the kind of energy that made Grace remember why she'd once dreamed of living somewhere bigger than Cleveland. She watched it all from windows that might as well have been paintings. The attack changed things. Cole hired more security. Men who looked like they'd been soldiers once and never quite left the battlefield. They swept the penthouse twice daily, monitored every entry point, made the already isolated space feel even more removed from the normal world. But Cole changed too. Subtle shifts that Grace might not have noticed if she hadn't been watching. He worked from home more, cancelled meetings, spent evenings in the living room instead of his office, reading files while Grace read her books, both of them existing in the same space without acknowledging why that mattered. He asked more questions. About her childhood in Ohio, about nursing school, about what she'd wanted before life had gotten so heavy. He listened like her answers mattered, like her history was more than just data to collect. And he started telling her things. Small things, carefully chosen things. About growing up in Boston with parents who'd built their fortune through ambition and ruthlessness. About learning that power came with a price. About the business he'd inherited and transformed into something both more legitimate and more dangerous. About being alone in a world where everyone wanted something from him. Grace understood loneliness, had lived with it for years. But Cole's loneliness was different. He was alone by design, by necessity, by the careful architecture of a life built to keep people at arm's length. She wondered what it cost him, Whether he missed connection or had taught himself not to need it. Whether he looked at her sometimes and saw something he wanted or just something he owned. The baby kicked for the first time in July. Grace was standing by the window, watching storm clouds gather over the lake, when she felt it flutter, then stronger. Proof of life. She gasped, pressed her hand to her belly, felt it again. Her eyes burned with tears she hadn't cried since Michael left. Grace! Cole appeared in the doorway, always aware, always watching. What's wrong? Nothing. She laughed. Shaky. The baby kicked. His expression shifted. Something flickered across his face that was gone too fast to name. That's good. That means everything's developing correctly. Do you want to feel? The question surprised her as much as it surprised him. She hadn't meant to ask. Hadn't planned it. But suddenly she wanted to share this moment with someone, and he was the only person here. The only person who'd been here through all of it. Cole crossed the room slowly, stood in front of her, hesitated. I don't want to. It's okay, Grace said. She took his hand, placed it on her belly where the movement had been, held it there. They waited. Storm clouds darkening the sky, rain starting to fall. Both of them frozen in this moment that felt too intimate and not intimate enough. The baby kicked again, right against Cole's palm. His eyes widened. Just slightly. Just enough. That's... I know. He didn't pull his hand away. Neither did she. They stood there while lightning flashed over Chicago, and Grace felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones and everything to do with the way Cole looked at her belly like it held something precious instead of something owed. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For letting me be part of this. You paid for the privilege. That's not what I mean. Grace met his eyes, gray like storm clouds. Then what do you mean? I mean I'm grateful. That you're here. That you're safe. That I can... He stopped. Removed his hand. Stepped back. I should let you rest. He left before she could respond. But Grace stood by the window long after he was gone, hand on her belly, wondering what he'd been about to say. Wondering if she wanted to know. If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. The next morning, Cole took her to a doctor's appointment for the first time. Not the house call kind. The kind at an actual clinic on the Gold Coast where women who married hedge fund managers went to have their designer babies. Grace felt out of place in her maternity jeans and cardigan while everyone else wore athleisure that cost more than her monthly salary used to. But Cole's hand rested lightly on her lower back as they walked in, and the receptionist smiled at them like they were just another wealthy couple expecting their first child. The ultrasound showed everything perfect. Strong heartbeat. Good growth. The technician asked if they wanted to know the gender. Grace looked at Cole. He looked back at her. Neither of them had discussed this. Hadn't planned for this moment. Were both suddenly aware that they were pretending to be something they weren't. It's up to you, Cole said. What do you think? I think you should decide. Grace turned back to the technician. Tell us. It's a girl. The words hung in the air. A girl. Grace's daughter. Michael's daughter. Except Michael was gone and Cole was here. And this baby was going to be born into a world where nothing made sense but somehow made perfect sense at the same time. Cole's hand tightened on her shoulder. Just barely. Just enough. Congratulations, the technician said, smiling like this was normal, like they were normal, like Grace wasn't carrying one man's child while falling for another man who'd bought her like property. In the car afterward, Cole asked, Have you thought about names? Not really. It didn't feel real before. And now? Now it's very real. They drove in silence, Chicago passing by outside. Grace watched the city and tried to imagine raising a daughter here. Tried to see a future that wasn't just survival but something close to happiness. My grandmother's name was Eleanor, Cole said. She was the only person in my family who was kind, who believed in mercy. Grace looked at him. Is that what you want? A kind daughter? I want her to be better than me. She will be, because she'll have a mother who worked her way through nursing school, who survived her husband's betrayal, who chose to keep fighting even when giving up would have been easier. Cole glanced at her. That's not me. That's you. I know. Something passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. The slow acknowledgement that they were building something neither of them had planned for. Something that looked like family if you squinted in the right light. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. The baby kicked and turned like she was practicing for the marathon of being born. Grace stood by the window in her bedroom, watching Chicago's lights, thinking about names and futures and how she'd gotten here. A knock on her door. Soft. Tentative. Come in. Cole entered. He wore pajama pants and a t-shirt. Grace had never seen him so casual. So human. I couldn't sleep either, he said. Baby's restless. Can I? He gestured to the window. I don't want to intrude. You're not. He stood beside her. Both of them reflected in the glass. Both of them watching the city instead of each other. I need to tell you something, Cole said. Grace's stomach clenched. What? Michael's dead. The words hit her like physical blows. She grabbed the window frame. What? My people found him 3 days ago. In Detroit. Overdose. Fentanyl-laced heroin. Grace's knees buckled. Cole caught her, held her up, guided her to the bed, sat beside her while she processed what it meant that the father of her child was gone, that she was a widow, that whatever complicated feelings she'd had about Michael, anger, betrayal, grief, resentment, were now frozen in amber forever. I'm sorry, Cole said. Don't be. He did this to himself. That doesn't make it hurt less. Grace laughed. Bitter. You think I'm going to cry for him? He gambled away our future, left me pregnant and broke, ran away like a coward. He was still your husband. He stopped being my husband when he betrayed me. Cole was quiet. His hand rested on hers. Warm. Solid. There in a way Michael never had been. What happens now? Grace asked. Nothing changes. You stay here. You're safe. The baby's safe. But the debt? There is no debt. Not anymore. Michael's death cleared it. You're free to go whenever you want. Grace turned to look at him. Really look at him. This man who'd bought her like property and treated her like treasure. Who'd given her everything and asked for nothing. Who'd protected her when he had no reason to. What if I don't want to go? She asked. Cole's eyes searched hers. Then stay. Why would you want me to? Because you make this place feel less empty. Because I like hearing you walk around at night when you can't sleep. Because watching you grow this baby has been the most real thing I've experienced in years. Because, he stopped. Looked away. Because I'm selfish. That's not selfish. It is. You could have a normal life. Meet someone who isn't. He gestured vaguely. This. Grace took his hand, placed it on her belly. Let him feel his daughter, because that's what she was now, what she'd been becoming. Kick and turn and live. I don't want normal, Grace said. Normal left me drowning. You pulled me out. I'm not a good man, Grace. I don't need good. I need real. He looked at her like she'd said something profound instead of obvious. Like she'd given him permission to be exactly what he was instead of what he thought he should be. Then he leaned forward, slowly, giving her time to pull away, to say no, to maintain the distance that had kept them safe. Grace didn't pull away. Their lips met, soft, tentative, the kiss of two people who'd been circling each other for months and finally stopped fighting the gravity. When they broke apart, Cole pressed his forehead to hers. Stay, he whispered. Okay, she said. And just like that, everything changed again. Autumn came to Chicago like a held breath releasing. Trees in Grant Park turning golden red. Wind off the lake carrying the promise of winter. Grace's belly growing round and impossible to hide. 8 months pregnant. Had daughter pressing against her ribs. Life getting ready to arrive whether anyone was prepared or not. Cole transformed. Or maybe Grace just finally saw what had been there all along. He read parenting books. Installed a car seat in the black sedan. Attended every doctor's appointment holding her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Called her my girls when he talked about her and the baby. Grace let herself believe it. Let herself imagine this could be real. That Cole Ashford, dangerous, powerful, complicated Cole, could be the father her daughter needed. That she could be happy here. In this gilded cage that had stopped feeling like a cage at all. They'd fallen into routines. Morning coffee together. Evenings on the couch with her feet in his lap because her ankles swelled. Late nights when the baby kicked and Cole would press his ear to her belly and tell their daughter stories about all the places he'd take her, all the things he'd show her, all the ways he'd protect her. Grace had stopped asking what he did for business. Stopped caring about the men in dark suits or the phone calls and languages she didn't understand. His world existed in shadows, but he brought light into hers. And wasn't that what mattered? She told herself it was. Told herself she'd made the right choice. Told herself this was love even though it had started as transaction. Because wasn't that the American way? Everything starting as business and becoming something more? But America had a way of collecting debts. The first sign came on a Tuesday. October rain against the windows. Grace was folding tiny clothes, harnesses and sleepers that Cole had bought in every color, when she heard shouting from his office. She'd learned not to interrupt. But this was different. Louder. More desperate. She recognized fear when she heard it, even muffled through walls and doors. She pressed her ear to the door. Don't care what it costs. The feds have recordings. Trace back to accounts in your name. Arrest warrants by Friday. The conversation ended. Silence fell. Grace backed away from the door, but not fast enough. Cole emerged. Saw her. His expression shifted from business to personal, from cold to careful. How much did you hear? He asked. Enough. Grace. Tell me the truth. Are you in trouble? He looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he had that first night in Cleveland when he'd made his offer. Measuring. Calculating. Deciding what she could handle. Yes, he said. What kind of trouble? The kind that doesn't go away. Grace's hand went to her belly. Protective. Instinctive. Is it safe? For us to be here? For now. For now isn't good enough. I know. He turned back into his office. Grace followed. She'd never been inside. It was smaller than she expected. Spartan. Desk. Computer. Walls lined with filing cabinets. Windows overlooking the city that might testify against him. The FBI has been investigating me for 3 years, Cole said. He didn't look at her. Kept his eyes on the window. Money laundering. Racketeering. Conspiracy. They've built a case. They have witnesses. Financial records. Recordings. From who? People I trusted. People I protected. People who decided saving themselves was more important than loyalty. Grace sat in his desk chair. Her body ached from carrying their daughter. Her mind raced with calculations. What happens if they arrest you? I go to prison. For a long time. Maybe forever. And us? You'll be protected. Money in accounts they can't touch. Security who work for me. Not the business. Everything you and Eleanor need. Grace froze. Eleanor. Cole turned. His eyes were wet. That's what I call her. In my head. Is that okay? Grace couldn't speak. Could only nod. Because he'd named their daughter after his grandmother. The one person who'd shown him mercy. The one person who'd made him believe in something soft. When? Grace asked. When what? When do they arrest you? Friday. Maybe sooner if someone tips them off. 3 days. Yes. Grace stood. Walked to him. Took his hands. looked up at this man who'd saved her and trapped her and loved her in ways she was still learning to understand. Then we have 3 days, she said. For what? To be a family. If your heart's racing too, take a breath. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more unforgettable love stories. Cole pulled her close, careful of her belly, his daughter pressed between them. 3 bodies making 1 unit. 1 moment of peace before the storm. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For bringing you into this. For making you believe we could have something normal. We did have something normal. For us. Grace. I don't regret it. Any of it. You should. But I don't. He kissed her. Deep. Desperate. The kiss of a man who knew he was about to lose everything. Grace kissed him back. Fierce. Claiming. Refusing to let go even as the world conspired to tear them apart. They spent 3 days pretending the end wasn't coming. Cole took her to Navy Pier at sunset even though his security said it was dangerous. They ate overpriced pizza and watched tourists take photos and acted like a normal couple expecting their first child. Grace's feet hurt and her back ached, but she wouldn't have traded it for anything. They went to the Art Institute. Walked slowly through galleries while Cole explained paintings he'd studied in boarding school, and Grace told him about the art teacher in her Ohio high school who'd made her believe beauty still existed even when life was ugly. They stayed up late watching old movies. Cole's hand on her belly. Eleanor kicking like she knew time was running out. Like she wanted to meet her father before he disappeared. On Thursday night, Grace went into labor. Early. Fast. Her water breaking at midnight. Contractions coming hard and close. Cole calling the doctor, calling his driver, his hand shaking as he helped her down to the car. The hospital was chaos. Bright lights and urgent voices. Grace being wheeled into delivery. Cole beside her, holding her hand, telling her to breathe even though he was the one who looked like he might pass out. Labor lasted 6 hours. Painful. Exhausting. Grace screaming things she'd apologize for later. Cole whispering encouragement and wiping her forehead and being exactly what she needed. At 6:17 a.m. on Friday, Eleanor Grace Ashford was born. 6 pounds, 8 ounces. Dark hair. Gray eyes like her father. Lungs that worked perfectly as she announced her arrival with screams that sounded like anger at being forced into the world. The nurse placed her on Grace's chest. Warm. Wet. Alive. Perfect. Cole stood beside them, his hand on Eleanor's head. Tears streaming down his face in a way Grace had never seen. Like something in him had broken open. Like he'd finally found the part of himself he'd been missing. She's beautiful, he said. She is. Thank you. For what? For giving me this. For trusting me. For, his voice broke. For letting me be her father. Grace looked up at him. This dangerous man. This complicated man. This man who'd bought her debt and given her everything. You are her father, she said. Not legally. I don't care about legally. You should. Before Grace could respond, the door opened. 2 men in suits. FBI badges. The kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Cole Ashford, one said. You're under arrest. Time stopped. The hospital room went silent except for Eleanor's soft breathing. Grace held her daughter tighter. Cole didn't move. Didn't resist. Just looked at his family one more time. I have an agreement with my lawyers, Cole said. I get 24 hours. For the birth. Agreement's void. New evidence came in overnight. We're taking you now. Grace watched them handcuff him. Watched Cole Ashford, who'd owned buildings and businesses and maybe half of Chicago, become just another criminal being led away. He looked back at her from the doorway. At Grace holding their daughter. At everything he was about to lose. I love you, he said. First time. Last time. Both of you. Then he was gone. And Grace sat alone in the hospital room, holding a baby girl who would never remember this moment, this loss, this breaking. But Grace would remember. Forever. The way love arrived and departed in the same breath. The way America took everything eventually. The way she'd thought she'd found safety but had only found another kind of cage. Eleanor started crying. Grace pulled her close, whispered promises she didn't know if she could keep. About being strong. About surviving. About loving this child enough for two parents even though one of them was being driven away in federal custody. Outside, dawn broke over Chicago. A new day. A new life. A new kind of alone that felt nothing like the Cleveland apartment where this had all started. Grace looked at her daughter, Eleanor, named for Mercy. "We're going to be okay," she said. She didn't believe it. Not yet. But maybe if she said it enough times, it would become true. That's how survival worked in America. You kept lying to yourself until the lies became the only truth that mattered. The penthouse felt different without Cole. Still expensive. Still beautiful. Still trapped. But now the trap was obvious. No more pretending it was home. Just walls and windows and the ghost of a man who'd tried to build something good in a life made of shadows. Grace stayed in the hospital for 2 days. Eleanor healthy. Strong. Perfect in the way newborns are before the world starts shaping them. Nurses cooing. Doctors pleased. Nobody mentioning that the baby's father had been arrested for federal crimes. Nobody asking why Grace sat alone in her room, staring at the wall. Cole's lawyers came. Expensive suits and careful words. They explained everything in the language of people who'd never been poor, never been desperate, never understood what it meant to survive on hope and borrowed time. The penthouse was hers. Trust fund for Eleanor. Security maintained. Everything Cole had promised, legally binding, impossible to break even with him in federal custody. Mrs. Ashford, the lead lawyer said. His name was Patterson. Harvard accent. Wedding ring that probably cost more than Grace's childhood home. You're financially secure. You and Eleanor will never want for anything. I'm not Mrs. Ashford, Grace said. Mr. Ashford had documents drawn up. Emergency guardianship provisions. In the eyes of the law, his Eleanor's father. Her father is. Grace stopped. Michael was dead. Cole was in prison. Eleanor's father was whoever the paperwork said he was. That's how America worked. Everything legal. Everything documented. Everything transactional. What happens to him? Grace asked. Trial in 6 months. Evidence is substantial. Multiple witnesses have testified. Financial records are clear. He'll likely receive, Patterson paused, a significant sentence. How significant? 20 years, minimum. Grace looked at Eleanor sleeping in her arms. 20 years. Her daughter would be in college before her father walked free. Would never know him except through stories and photographs and whatever memories Grace could keep alive through 2 decades of his absence. Can I see him? His being held without bail. High flight risk. Substantial assets. But yes, we can arrange visitation. When? After his processed. A week. Maybe 2. Grace nodded. Looked out the hospital window at Chicago. The city kept moving. People kept working. Life kept happening like the world hadn't just cracked open and swallowed everything that mattered. Thank you, she said. Patterson stood. Straightened his tie. Mr. Ashford wants you to know, he paused. He never meant for this to happen. Nobody ever does. Before we close this chapter, take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Every small gesture helps the next story find its way to you. Taking Eleanor home felt wrong. The penthouse was too quiet. Too big. Security everywhere but no Cole. No one to share midnight feedings or diaper changes or the exhausted wonder of watching this tiny human exist. Grace did it alone. Like she'd always known she would. Like America had trained women to do for generations. Smile through the pain. Keep moving. Survive. Eleanor was easy. Ate well. Slept in 3-hour stretches. Cried when she needed something and stopped when she got it. Grace's body ached from delivery, but she pushed through. Nurses were good at that. Functioning on no sleep. Ignoring their own pain. taking care of everyone else. The first week blurred together. Feeding, changing, sleeping when Eleanor slept. The penthouse felt like a museum. Beautiful things she was afraid to touch. Cole's office stayed closed. His bedroom untouched. Like he'd just stepped out and might return any moment. But he wouldn't. Not for 20 years. Maybe never. Grace tried not to think about it. Tried to focus on Eleanor. On being a mother. On building whatever life she could in the ruins of what they'd almost had. The second week, she got permission to visit. Metropolitan Correctional Center downtown. High-rise jail with tiny windows. Grace had been inside once before, when a patient's family member needed a statement for court. She'd hated it then. Hated the smell, the sound, the feeling of hope dying in fluorescent light. She hated it more now. Security. Metal detectors. Guards who looked at her with the kind of judgment that came from seeing too many women visit too many men who'd made too many bad choices. They took Eleanor through separately. Checked her diaper. Like a 2-week-old baby might be smuggling contraband. Grace wanted to scream. Wanted to tell them her daughter was innocent. That this wasn't fair. That babies shouldn't have to visit their fathers in prison. But she stayed quiet. Nodded. Followed the rules. That's what survival looked like in America. Swallowing rage. Playing the game. Hoping for mercy from people with power. The visitation room was small. White walls. Metal table. Chairs bolted to the floor. Cole sat waiting. Orange jumpsuit. Hands cuffed. Face thinner than she remembered. Eyes hollow. He looked up when she entered. Something broke across his face. Joy and pain mixing into an expression Grace couldn't name. Grace. Hi. She's Saturday. Held Eleanor carefully. The baby slept through everything. Innocent. Unaware her father was in chains. She's beautiful, Cole said. She is. Can I? He gestured with cuffed hands. Can I hold her? Grace looked at the guard. The guard nodded. She stood. Walked around the table. Placed Eleanor in Cole's arms as carefully as possible given the restraints. He looked down at his daughter. Tears streaming. Not trying to hide them. Not caring who saw. Eleanor, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Grace sat back down. Watched this man, who'd controlled an empire, who'd built wealth from violence, who'd never apologized for anything, break completely for a baby who weighed less than 7 pounds. How are you? Cole asked without looking up. Surviving. The penthouse. It's fine. Security. Always there. Money. I don't care about money, Cole. He looked up. You should. Money is the only thing that protects you now. Money didn't protect you. No, it didn't. They sat in silence. Eleanor stirred. Made small sounds. Cole adjusted his hold as best he could with cuffed hands. Natural. Instinctive. Like he'd been doing this forever instead of for the first time. What happens now? Grace asked. I plead guilty. Cooperate with the FBI. Hope they reduce my sentence. To what? 15 years. Maybe 12 if I give them enough. Grace's chest hurt. Eleanor will be in high school. I know. She won't remember you. I know that too. So why did you do this? Why did you bring us into your life if you knew it would end like this? Cole looked at her. Really looked at her. Because I was lonely. Because you were broken. Because I thought I could have something real before the walls closed in. I was selfish, Grace. I'm not pretending otherwise. You gave us everything. I gave you money. That's not everything. It's more than anyone else gave us. Cole smiled. Sad. Tired. Don't defend me. I don't deserve it. I'm not defending you. I'm just. Grace stopped. I don't know what I'm doing. You're surviving. Like you always do. I don't want to just survive anymore. Then live, Grace. Take Eleanor and live. Go anywhere. Do anything. You're free now. Really free. Not trapped in Cleveland. Not trapped here. Just free. I don't feel free. You will. The guard called time. 5 minutes gone too fast. Cole kissed Eleanor's forehead, handed her back to Grace with hands that shook. Their fingers touched. Briefly. Not enough. I love you, Cole said. Both of you. That's the only true thing I've ever done. Grace stood, holding her daughter, looking at the father who wouldn't be there for first steps or first words or any of the firsts that mattered. I love you too, she said. Then she walked away. Through the door. Through security. Through the building that held him like he'd held her. Different cages. Same loss. Outside. Chicago autumn hit her face. Cold. Clean. Real. Eleanor woke up. Looked at her mother with gray eyes that matched her father's. Innocent. Trusting. Believing Grace would keep her safe even though Grace didn't know how. We're going to be okay, Grace whispered. This time. She almost believed it. Winter came early to Chicago. Snow in November. Ice on the lake. The city slowing down the way northern cities do when cold settles in for months. Grace watched it from windows that used to feel like prison, but now just felt like protection from a world that had taken too much. Eleanor grew. 2 months old. 3. 4. Smiling now. Making sounds that weren't quite words but felt like conversation. Grace talked to her constantly. About everything and nothing. About her father. About Cleveland. About the life they'd almost had. She didn't tell Eleanor about the visits. About driving downtown twice a month to that building where Hope went to die. About watching Cole hold their daughter through chains and glass and the weight of choices he couldn't take back. He was changing too. Getting thinner. Quieter. The empire he'd built was being dismantled piece by piece. Assets seized. Businesses shuttered. Associates flipping. His lawyers called with updates. Plea deals. Sentencing recommendations. The architecture of 20 years compressing into 12, then 10, then maybe 8 with good behavior. 8 years. Eleanor would be 8. 3rd grade. Learning multiplication and reading chapter books and having no memory of the father who'd chosen her name. Grace tried to make peace with it. Tried to focus on Eleanor. On being enough for both of them. On building a life that didn't revolve around a man in prison. But at night, alone in the bed she'd shared with Cole for those few perfect weeks, she ached. Not just for him. For the family they'd almost been. For the future that had evaporated like Chicago snow in unexpected sun. Patterson called in February. Snow falling outside. Eleanor napping in her crib. Grace holding coffee that had gone cold. The FBI wants to talk to you, Patterson said. Grace's stomach dropped. About what? Your relationship with Mr. Ashford. How it started. What you knew about his business. I didn't know anything. That's what you'll need to explain. Under oath. Am I in trouble? No. They are building a case around his character. Whether he's capable of rehabilitation. Whether he's a danger. Your testimony could help or hurt him. What should I say? The truth, Mrs. Ashford. I told you, I'm not. Legally you are. He filed papers before his arrest. You're his wife in everything but ceremony. Eleanor is his legitimate daughter. The law recognizes this relationship. Grace set down her coffee, looked at Eleanor's baby monitor. Her daughter sleeping peacefully, unaware her mother was about to decide her father's fate. When? Grace asked. Next week. Federal building. They'll be respectful but thorough. Okay. Grace, Patterson paused. Tell them about the good things. About how he protected you. Provided for you. Loved Eleanor. They need to see him as human, not just a criminal. Is that allowed? It's the truth. That's always allowed. The deposition lasted 4 hours. Grace in a room with 2 FBI agents and 3 lawyers and a court reporter typing every word. They asked about Cleveland. About the debt. About how Cole had found her. About the contract. About moving to Chicago. About the attack. About labor. about everything that mattered and everything that didn't. Grace told the truth. All of it. The transaction that became something more. The cage that became home. The fear that became love. She didn't lie, didn't embellish, just explained what it felt like to be saved by someone who needed saving just as badly. The lead agent was a woman, Agent Morrison. 40-something. Wedding ring. Pictures of kids on her phone when she thought Grace wasn't looking. Did you ever feel unsafe with Mr. Ashford? Morrison asked. No. He held you against your will. He gave me a choice. I chose to stay. After he'd already trapped you. After he'd already saved me. Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Ashford, I need you to understand something. Cole Ashford is responsible for violence, money laundering, and crimes that hurt real people. He's not a hero. I know what he is. Do you? Yes. He's complicated. He's dangerous. He built an empire on blood and lies. But he loved my daughter. He loved me. That doesn't excuse what he did. But it makes him human. Humans go to prison. And humans deserve a second chance. Morrison sat back, exchanged looks with her partner. Is that what you want? For him to get out early? Grace thought about it. Really thought. About Eleanor. About the future. About whether bringing Cole back into their lives would help or hurt. I want him to have the chance to know his daughter, Grace said. Beyond prison visits. Beyond stolen moments. I want Eleanor to have a father. Not just stories. Not just photographs. But a real person who shows up. That's what I want. Even if he's dangerous. He's dangerous to his enemies. Not to us. How do you know? Because he had every opportunity to hurt me, to control me, to make me afraid. And instead he made me feel safe for the first time since I was a child. That's how I know. The deposition ended. Grace went home. Fed Eleanor. Changed her. Put her down for a nap. Stood by the window watching Chicago and wondering if she'd just helped to hurt the man she loved. Patterson called that night. You did good. Did I help him? You showed them he's capable of love, of change. That matters. Will it be enough? I don't know, but it's something. Grace hung up, looked at Eleanor sleeping in her crib. Her daughter's face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. Perfect. Innocent. Deserving of better than any of this. Your father loves you, Grace whispered. I need you to know that. Whatever happens, however long it takes, he loves you. Eleanor slept on, unaware, safe, exactly what Grace had fought for. If stories like this linger in your heart long after they end, don't leave just yet. Like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below, and let the next story find you when the night grows quiet again. Spring came, then summer. Eleanor turned 1. Grace threw a small party in the penthouse. Just them and the security guards who'd become something like family. Cake that Eleanor smashed into her face. Presents she was too young to open. Photos Grace would show Cole next visit. The trial happened in June. Grace attended every day. Sat in the gallery with Eleanor. Listened to prosecutors detail Cole's crimes. Watched him sit silent and still while his life was reduced to evidence and testimony and the weight of choices made in shadows. The verdict came fast. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing a month later. Grace held her breath for 30 days. Tried to prepare for 20 years. Tried to imagine explaining to Eleanor why her father was gone. Sentencing day arrived hot and humid. Chicago summer pressing against the courtroom windows. Cole in a suit his lawyers had brought. Looking more like himself. Less like the prisoner he'd become. The judge was older. Black robe. Gray hair. Eyes that had seen too many men claim remorse they didn't feel. But then he looked at Grace. At Eleanor on her lap. At the family sitting in the gallery waiting for justice or Macy or whatever this moment would bring. Mr. Ashford, the judge said, I've read the testimony from your wife. From the FBI. From people you've hurt and people you've helped. You are clearly a complicated man. You've done terrible things. You've also, apparently, done one or two good things. Cole didn't respond. Just stood there taking whatever was coming. The prosecution has asked for 20 years. Your cooperation has earned consideration. The court recognizes your relationship with your daughter. Young children need their fathers, even fathers who've made catastrophic choices. Grace held her breath. Eleanor squirmed in her arms. I'm sentencing you to 8 years in federal prison. With good behavior, you could be out in 6. Use that time, Mr. Ashford. Figure out who you want to be when you're free. 8 years. 6 with good behavior. Eleanor would be 7. 2nd grade. Old enough to remember. Old enough to know her father when he came home. Grace exhaled. Tears streaming. Not happiness. Not exactly. But relief. Hope. The possibility that this story didn't end with permanent loss. Cole turned. Looked at her. Mouthed something she couldn't hear but understood anyway. Thank you. Then they took him away. Back to prison. Back to counting days. But fewer days now. A countdown that felt possible instead of infinite. Grace stood. Held Eleanor. Walked out of the courthouse into Chicago summer and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not happiness. Not yet. But the beginning of something close. The belief that maybe, just maybe, they'd survive this after all. 6 years passed the way time does when you're waiting for something. Slowly and then all at once. Eleanor grew from baby to toddler to little girl. Started walking. Started talking. Started asking questions about the father in photographs and prison visits and stories her mother told like bedtime prayers. Grace told her everything. Age-appropriate versions. About how they met. About how Cole had saved them. About how he'd made mistakes but was working to become better. About how love was complicated and family was complicated and America was complicated, but they were theirs and that mattered. Eleanor understood in the way children understand. Accepting what was because she'd never known anything different. The penthouse was home. The security guards were uncles. Prison visits were normal. Just part of life. Just how their family worked. Grace built something new in those years. Went back to nursing. Not night shifts anymore, but clinic work. Helping people without insurance navigate a system designed to exclude them. Using Cole's money to fund free care for those who couldn't afford it. Turning his criminal empire into something that actually helped the Cleveland girls and Cleveland boys trying to survive in Chicago now. She moved them out of the penthouse. Too many memories. Too much isolation. Found a brownstone in Lincoln Park. Tree-lined street. Good school district. The kind of neighborhood where Eleanor could ride her bike and Grace could pretend they were normal. They weren't normal. Would never be normal. But they were happy. In the complicated way that happiness exists for people who've survived things they shouldn't have had to. Cole called twice a week. Prison phone calls that cost too much and lasted too little. He asked about Eleanor. About school and friends and whether she still loved the color purple. About Grace. About the clinic and the brownstone and whether she was taking care of herself. He never asked her to wait. Never presumed she'd still be there when he got out. Never made demands or promises or assumptions about their future. That's how Grace knew he'd changed. Real change. Not the kind you perform for parole boards, but the kind that happens in silence when you've lost everything and have to rebuild yourself from nothing. 6 years became 5. Then 4. Then 3. Eleanor turned 6. Started 1st grade. Lost her first tooth. Learned to read. Asked harder questions about why her father was in prison and whether he was a bad man. Grace always told the truth. He did bad things. But he's not a bad person. People are more complicated than good or bad. Like in stories? Eleanor asked. Exactly like in stories. Is he the hero or the villain? He's both. That's what makes him interesting. Eleanor thought about it. I think he's the hero who made mistakes. That's probably right. The release date circled on the calendar like a target. Grace didn't know what she felt. Excitement. Fear. Hope. Uncertainty. All of it at once. She'd built a life without him. A good life. Eleanor was thriving. The clinic was growing. They were okay. Did okay need to become something more? She visited him the week before. Eleanor at home with a neighbor. Grace alone in that familiar room with its bolted chairs and judgment. Cole looked different. Older. Grayer. But healthier somehow. Like prison had stripped away the excess and left only what was essential. He'd been working out. Teaching literacy classes. Finishing a degree. Becoming the person the judge had hoped he'd become. 1 week, Grace said. Yeah. Are you scared? Terrified. Of what? Of disappointing you. Of not knowing how to be Eleanor's father. Of stepping into a world I don't recognize anymore. The world hasn't changed that much. I have. Grace looked at him. This man she'd loved and hated and survived with. This complicated, dangerous, tender man who'd bought her debt and given her everything. What do you want? She asked. When you get out. I want to know my daughter. I want to be whatever she needs. He stopped. I want to earn the right to be in your lives. Not assume it. Not demand it. Just earn it. You've already earned it. Have I? Yes. Cole's eyes filled. He didn't look away. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you have me anyway. Do I? Grace reached across the table. Took his hand. Prison rules said no touching, but she didn't care, and the guard didn't stop her. Yes, she said. You do. Release day came quiet and cold. November in Chicago. 6 years almost to the day since he'd been arrested. Grace stood outside the facility. Eleanor beside her. Both of them bundled in coats and waiting for a man they'd both loved differently and completely. The door opened. Cole stepped out. Free. Really free. Not on bail or probation, but finished with his sentence and beginning whatever came next. He saw them. Stopped. Stared like they might disappear if he moved too fast. Eleanor looked up at Grace. Is that him? That's him. He looks like his pictures. Older though. Yeah, older. Cole walked toward them. Slow. Careful. Stopped a few feet away like he didn't know if he was allowed closer. Eleanor studied him. This man she'd visited but never really known. This father who existed in stories and photographs and the space between what was and what could be. Then she smiled. Hi, Dad. Something broke in Cole's face. Hi, Eleanor. Mom says you can make pancakes. I can. Can you make them tomorrow? If your mom says it's okay. Eleanor looked at Grace. Grace nodded. Tomorrow sounds good. Eleanor grabbed Cole's hand. Just like that. No hesitation. No fear. Just a 6-year-old girl claiming her father because that's what he was, regardless of time or distance or the years they'd lost. Cole looked at Grace over their daughter's head. Mouthed something. Maybe thank you. Maybe I love you. Maybe both. Grace smiled. Took his other hand. Eleanor between them. A family. Imperfect. Complicated. Built from debt and desperation and the kind of love that survived things it shouldn't have. They walked to Grace's car. Eleanor chattering about school and her best friend and the tooth fairy. Cole listening like she was reciting poetry. Grace watching both of them and feeling something settle in her chest that had been restless for 6 years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but close enough. The city spread out before them. Chicago in early winter. Hard and beautiful and full of possibility. They drove through it together. Past the brownstone that would become his home too. Past the clinic where he'd volunteer. Past the parks where Eleanor would teach him to push her on swings. Past all the places they'd build new memories. Better ones. The kind that would matter more than the ones they'd lost. Grace glanced at Cole in the passenger seat. His hand still in Eleanor's. His eyes on the road ahead. Present in a way he'd never been before prison. Real in a way that money and power had never made him. You okay? She asked. Yeah, he said. I am. And for the first time in 6 years, Grace believed him. Life wouldn't be easy, wouldn't be simple. Cole had parole conditions, employment requirements, therapy, check-ins. The architecture of second chances was complicated and demanding, but they'd survived worse. Cleveland and Chicago, debt and betrayal, prison and separation. 6 years of phone calls and visits and waiting. They could survive rebuilding too. That night, in the brownstone Grace had made home, they sat together on the couch. Eleanor asleep upstairs, Cole's arm around Grace, both of them quiet in the way people are when words aren't necessary. "Thank you," Cole said finally, "for waiting." "I wasn't waiting," Grace said. "I was living. We both were. And now we live together. Figure it out as we go. Make mistakes and fix them. Be a family." That simple. That complicated. Cole kissed her forehead. "I can do complicated." "Good, because we're very complicated. The best things are." Outside, Chicago settled into night. Cars passing. Lives continuing. The world spinning on regardless of individual stories of loss and love and survival. But inside the brownstone on that tree-lined street in Lincoln Park, 3 people who'd found each other in darkness sat together in lamplight. And for once, for now, that was enough. Grace looked at the man beside her, the one who'd bought her debt and given her freedom, who'd trapped her and saved her, who'd been her captor and her family, who'd loved her in the only way he knew how and was learning to love better. "Welcome home," she said. Cole smiled. "Tired, real, free. Thank you for building one." Eleanor called from upstairs. Something about needing water, about checking for monsters, about all the small demands of childhood that make up the architecture of family. Grace started to get up. Cole stopped her. "I'll go." "You sure?" "Yeah, I need to learn sometime." He climbed the stairs. Grace heard him talking softly to Eleanor, heard their daughter laugh, heard the beginning of something that would take years to build but would be worth every moment. She closed her eyes, let exhaustion and relief and gratitude wash over her. They'd made it, against odds that should have crushed them. They'd survived, not intact, not unchanged, but together. And in America, in this hard and beautiful country that took more than it gave, that broke more than it fixed, that promised everything and delivered only what you fought for. Together was revolutionary. Together was enough. Together was exactly what Grace Bennett had been looking for all along.